Welcome to the Livestock Podcast, sponsored by the University of Tennessee Beef and Forage Center. I'm Bruno Pedreira, Senior Director and UT Forage Extension Specialist. Here again, once more with Dr. Katie Mason, our UT Beef Cattle Specialist. Are you doing good today, Dr. Mason?
I'm great. I'm excited to be here and excited to talk about dairy.
Dairy, yeah. Well, this is the Beef and Forage Center podcast, but we talk dairy, we talk equine, we play all the livestock game in Tennessee.
Remind you that for your beef calves to be successful, all of your beef cattle have to lactate.
We gotta have them
and all of
right?
lactating cows eventually enter the beef market. So really, we're just all one big happy family.
Well,
Right.
anyhow, we'll talk about all of this here today. We are very pleased to welcome Dr. Eckelkamp here, our UT Extension Dairy Specialist, and also the Director of the Dairy Advancement and Sustainability Center. Did I say it right?
You put the center on the wrong end, but yes, you got all the other words right.
That's right. So you have a Dairy Advancement and Sustainability Center.
Center for Dairy Advancement and Sustainability. Yes, I do.
Okay, that's a lot of words together.
It is. That's why we call it CDOS, because it's much easier.
CDOS. Well, Liz, welcome to our Livestock Podcast. We have been trying to have you on the books for a while. I'm glad we did it for this July, just after our June Dairy Month.
Yeah.
Right? So, welcome. We're excited to have you here.
I'm thrilled to be here and excited to talk about all things cattle and
Cattle.
forage. We'll do a big broad caption.
Yeah, we'll wrap it all up together. So before we jump into some more specific topics, can you tell us about how you got into your position, kind of how the center formed, and just some of your background?
Going back to like all the way when I was born, right? That's really
Yeah.
perfect. Okay, well, we'll skip ahead about 18 years. So I really got involved in dairy at LSU when I was doing my undergrad. Me, like so many students that we have come through UT, thought that the only thing I could do with animals, being from a non-ag background, was I can go to vet school or I can be a zookeeper, right? So in order to fund my pathway there, I was looking for scholarship opportunities, and they had one involved in dairy at LSU. So all I had to do was have a job related to dairy, which could have been like in a lab. And I was like, perfect, I can handle that. Take dairy classes and be in dairy club. Easy peasy. Additional support, work, study. I was like, this is great. Did not expect to fall truly, madly, deeply in love with cows and dairy cattle in particular. But we had a cow named Daisy. We followed in our second semester. And Daisy kept us on our toes for about a week because it was her third lactation. She did not actually want to have her calf when she was supposed to. So we kept getting calls at like midnight for a week that she was in labor, and she wasn't until Friday night, or I guess it was really Saturday morning, as a freshman at LSU on a Friday. Was not prepared for the 5 a.m. phone call when the feet finally showed up. We had to go back out to the dairy. Was not a happy human.
Of course.
But we get out there, and Daisy is just so invested in everything else but having a calf. She's like trying to follow the bucket with the disinfectant. Our herdsman just basically put the wrap on the back feet and held it, and she walked it out while I held the bucket. And I was like, all right, cows are cool. Immediately addicted to cows. She would also follow the farmer and moo at him when she was ready to be bred. So it was really easy to tell when she was in
Sure.
So that is how I got involved in dairy. And then I didn't end up going to vet school, wasn't super bummed about it, and started looking at grad school opportunities, and ended up working with Dr. Jeffrey Bewley, who was then at University of Kentucky, working with facilities. So I worked with compost-bedded pack barns and sand-bedded freestalls, and all of those were farmer-focused projects. So I worked with 16 dairy farmers across the state for my master's, and then 4 dairy farmers across the state for my PhD. So everything that I did was very applied research, working with daily problems of farmers. I was out on my farms every other week with my master's and every single week with my PhD. So really getting to be part of these farmers' lives, seeing some of the issues and the challenges that they face that were outside of my project. And that's really where I became passionate about extension. So when I graduated, I was looking for extension heavy opportunities. And I looked here and at A&M and was offered both positions, but I really chose this one because it was a similar style of farming and a similar size of farming to what I'd done in Kentucky. And I thought I really could do the most good here and provide the most support with similar issues and similar farming styles that I'd had experience with in Kentucky.
And
To
Tennessee
kind of
is a
maintain those
lovely
relationships.
place to be,
It
right?
is. It's beautiful. Like, how do you
We're
not
blessed.
enjoy? Well, you weren't here yet, and you weren't here. I've been here longer than both of. I've been here longer than everyone in this room. But I'm glad you came to join. It was
It's
me,
good.
right? I'm what brought you here.
Yes.
That's what I
Of
thought.
course. So for how long have you been here?
Oh God, you're gonna make me
Few
sound-
years?
Bruno. I've been here 9 years in November.
That's good. Well, no, that's important because my next question to you is you have been here and experiencing all of these changes that the industry
Oh,
went
yes.
through in the last few years, right? So from your perspective, what are the biggest challenges, our producers are facing in Tennessee or have been facing in Tennessee in this last 10 years?
You said you wanted to keep us to 20 minutes, right? So a persistent challenge that I think everyone in agriculture faces is we're all commodities, right? So every single one of us has to be a price taker. We don't get to set
Yeah.
the price that we want for our product, which is great for our customers. We know that they're always going to be able to go to the store and get milk or go to the store and get ground beef, maybe not ribeye, but right, like ground beef is always going to be a staple that you can have in your fridge. You're always going to be able to go get flour, sugar, like our pantry staples that we consider as things that are necessary for survival. But the downside of that is, particularly in dairy, is we get paid based on how our product is used. So we get paid based on whether our product becomes milk, whether it becomes cheese, whether it becomes ice cream, butter, dried milk powder that then goes into Cheeto dust, right? Like that is how we get paid for our product. And some of those consumption trends have really changed over time. So milk consumption has been dramatically declining over the last 60 to 100 years. It's been a long time.
Okay.
There's a lot
I want to
more
tell you
things.
that I've been doing my best at home.
I was
We
gonna say,
are now a gallon every 2 or 3 days.
Just have us in good shape. My toddler is keeping, I think, at least
Yeah.
one dairy farm in business because he goes through about 1.5 gallons a day. But if we think about the general things that we consume, most people still buy it, right? Like a gallon is going to be a standard in your fridge, or a half gallon, or a pint, or whatever. Like most people have not gone away from milk overall, but the volume of consumption has gone down. I would say most houses still consume milk in some form or fashion, right? Whether it's as part of a recipe or if it's with cereal. So it's not that really we're really seeing displacement there, that we're not buying it at all. It's just, it's not the only thing we drink anymore, right? So if you think about what you drink in a day, water is probably a huge part of what you drink, whether it is water out of like the water fountain, or it's a smart water, or a pH balanced water, or a fizzy water, or some other water that has a weird health claim to it, right? But that's probably a huge part of what you consume in a day. Coffee is another big part of what I consume in my day. Tea might be another one, juices. So just the options are so much more varied now, right? That we don't have those same 2 to 3 options that we might have had in the 40s and 50s, right? Where our options were water out of the tap, milk, maybe juice if we had it from concentrate, and maybe if we wanted to make tea. That was another thing that we had. But our options are pretty much like, here's your milk or here's your water. Go. So that's been a big issue. We don't have a lot of diversification of processing in our state either. So most of our milk goes into fluid milk, so like milk we'd buy in a jug, or ice cream. And those things are both great. There is like we get the highest price per volume for things like milk going into a fluid production, but we see greater demand for things like cheese. So even in Tennessee, even though that's not where our milk goes, cheese is the thing that most people consume.
Okay.
We don't have any cheese processing in our state on a large scale. We've got a lot of farmstead operations that do cheese and that they can command a higher price for their milk, but that is not like our traditional market. So all of our farmers, when they're selling it to someone, it's not going into cheese production. It's going into milk or ice cream.
So that decline in fluid milk, and then just there's also some other, external factors, input costs and labor availability and all those things. So what are the ones that you have seen that have been kind of the most prominent that you've maybe worked with farmers to?
So feed cost, 1,000% is consistently our highest cost of production, followed by labor. And then labor has its own challenges of, one, we need to pay for it, and then 2, actually getting labor back to the farm. And then the one that it's not really an input cost, but it is a barrier to continuation, is a next generation.
Yeah.
Dairy farming is very much a full-time job, right? And I'm not saying that other ag industries aren't, but y'all all know there's no off switch on a dairy cow.
Yeah.
So once she starts lactating, she doesn't stop for hopefully 305 days, right? Sometimes longer. So when we're thinking about a dairy farm, we have to be there every single day to milk her twice a day or 3 times a day, no matter what. Unless we have like a robotic milking system,
Right.
which is great until it goes down, right? Because it's technology. All technology
Yep.
fails at
At
some
some
point. Yeah. So there is not a lot of personal freedom that comes with owning a dairy farm. It's probably the best way I could say it. And just like, your beef farmers have to be cattle farmers and forage farmers, so do my dairy farmers, right? They've got to be dairy farmers, they've got to be mechanics, they have to be forage farmers, they have to be not ration experts, right? But they have to go through and mix a ration. They have to be a health expert to some extent. They have to be a manure manager.
Yeah.
They have to be an HR manager. And then we also have like an interface with the public, particularly because we have so few, right? We've got somewhere around 86 cattle dairy farms in the state and another 6 that are goat dairies and one that's a sheep dairy. When our numbers become that low, right, it becomes really easy to know where the farmer is in your area. And yes, you want to know where your food comes from,
Okay.
but it also kind of puts you like in a fishbowl under a microscope, right? So like, what are you doing?
Okay.
Especially when so many of them are involved in agritourism.
And this is something that changed as well, right? When I did research the numbers, we used to have more farmers doing it with a lower herd.
Yep.
Now we have less people doing it with larger herds.
Yep.
How does that change those kind of scenarios? Is it just because cost and labor and everything is pushing them to increase the numbers?
And the way that I try to think about it is think about any other family business, right? Because farming is a family business.
Yes.
It's a way of life, but it's
Yep.
absolutely a family business. So how many mom and pop grocery stores do we still have versus large box stores? How many mom and pop dentists or hardware stores or literally pick a category,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So
yeah.
everything used to be a small family business, and you either transition that to the next generation, even if we're thinking about like a restaurant, right? You either transition that to the next generation, or we have to fill those services some other way. So the majority of our industries have consolidated in some shape or form. And if we think about like Weigel's, I think is a great example, right? Weigel's probably started off with 1 or 2 grocery stores and a processing facility and a dairy. And over time, they have expanded the number of stores. They've expanded that family brand into like a more regional brand. Mayfield is another great example of that, right? It was a small family-owned processor that grew and then sold to a larger company. And that's just kind of the nature of being a family business. If you don't have a next generation to take it over, it has to transition to some other form
Something
of
else,
business. And then those assets have to go somewhere. So if we think about our national herds, think about like the US as a whole, our herd has stayed pretty consistent at 9.3 million dairy cows for the last 10 plus years.
Okay.
So our national herd hasn't changed. But what has changed is our number of operations.
How
So
it's dispersed.
everywhere
Yeah.
we've had a reduction in herd like total number of farms
Okay.
and an overall growth in number of animals per farm. I would say we see that magnified in the Southeast because that war of attrition kind of hit here first, but we've seen it in other places. So like during COVID, Wisconsin talked about losing 400 dairy farms in a year. Now that was more than our entire dairy farm population. But for them, that was a reduction of like, I think it was 4 to 5% of their dairy farm operations, which was, incredibly concerning, especially that it happened so quickly there. So our numbers do continue to decline, but the number that we lose every year is smaller as a relative percentage of what we have. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And it's interesting you talk about kind of that business model of the dairy and I think about how it compares to beef operations. And obviously there's like very integrated livestock, systems. Dairy is not necessarily that way, but it is more streamlined, than the beef industry is. And so when you think about that, like when I'm working with a beef producer, there are some that are very progressive on top of all of the new technology, doing all the things. There are some that are like, I have cows and like they pretty well just kind of do what they want.
Yeah.
And so in the dairy industry, it almost seems like, margins are tight, right? So it seems like if you haven't jumped on board with the best management practices, like you're probably going to get left behind pretty quickly, especially with this consolidation. And so I guess the question is, when you're working with producers, do you see that they're trying to catch up on best management practices, or are they trying to take that next step into how to transition to like a bigger dairy, or how to do, you've talked about processing and value added type stuff. So where do you see our Tennessee dairy producers in that? I'm sure there's a scale, a scale, but
you're going to love it because it's my classic extension answer. It
right?
depends. Yeah. And it absolutely does. And what it really depends on is what is that farm family's focus, right? A lot of our farm families don't want to grow. Right. They're happy at the number of cows that they have. So they're not, or they're landlocked. Right. So growing our herd from 120 to 1,000 cows to fill a tanker truck is not realistic. Right. There's a lot of land base that has to go into growing a herd to be that size. And that's assuming that we're not in a place that has like urban encroachment. I don't know if y'all have been to the Hatcher family farms over in Nashville. Have either of y'all been there? So like, they were there first, obviously. They are still a grazing dairy. They do have robots. They do their own processing, but you literally go down this road, and on the left side of the road are mega mansions. And I mean like huge mansions in a giant subdivision. And then you turn to the right and you see rolling hills on pasture and an older barn and a processing facility and a farm store. So he is literally surrounded on all sides by large scale urban areas in like Nashville suburbia. So him growing is not an option.
No.
So alternative diversification had to happen to keep that operation going. So sometimes it's a labor constraint. Sometimes it's just a philosophy of how they want to dairy and how they want to manage. But the bigger thing is just what works for that operation. So that's kind of always where we start, is what works for that operation. I try to have them all do some baseline economic assessments with us through the Dairy Gauge program. So we can figure out where they are. Where is their cost of production? What value are they getting for their milk? Where are some of their areas that we might be spending a little bit more money than our other dairy farms in the area? Because that can help us figure out what place we need to focus on. Sometimes it's out of our control, right? So if we are landlocked and we do not have the base to grow all of the forage that we need, we might have to think about maintaining a more expensive ration. Or if the cost of labor in our area is we're competing with a Ford manufacturing plant, we can't really lower our labor costs because we're trying to attract people and keep
And
them.
you can't,
Yeah, that's tough.
No, that's good. That a lot of things that we are talking here. I really wanted you to go over the Center for Dairy Advancement and Sustainability. What is that exactly? How can we help producers in Tennessee with the center? Why did you create that? Let's go over a little bit.
So a big reason of why we created the Center for Dairy Advancement and Sustainability is because dairy is such a multifaceted industry, right? It's not just cows. It's not just economics. It's not just human management. It's also not just processing. It's everything under one big roof. So another program that I run is the Southeast Dairy Business Innovation Initiative. And that is a grant-focused program, so that grants for dairy businesses across Tennessee and the Southeast. And with that, we really leverage this great team of economists and leadership experts and animal scientists and food scientists and veterinarians and individuals involved with artificial intelligence and computer technology. And we didn't have a great way to pull all of that together. So like we all did SDBII work, and that was great, but we were all still so distinct. So we created CDOS as a way to pull everybody under one roof and say, these are all the experts that we have that are doing something related to dairy. So we have a multifaceted, multi-departmental team and multi-institutional team that is tackling these Southeastern dairy challenges. So that is really where that came from. Was to really pull us all together. So like I mentioned the Dairy Gauge program. That program isn't inherently mine. I work with it, but that is part of something that David Bilderback with the managed team out of our Ag Econ department had been doing before I even got here. So we've partnered on it, we've refined it, we've tried to answer a few different questions, and that has been part of it. But that's just one example of it's multi-departmental and intended to help support our producers.
And how can dairy producers take advantage of that? How do you guys work with them to make sure that they get the grants, and
Yeah.
how does that work?
So within like the grant specifically for the SDBI, I have a team of extension specialists that we've been able to expand through that grant programming. So over half of what we get from those grants goes directly out to dairy businesses. The other like portion, if you will, so there's the farm grant portion or the producer grant portion, then there's our portion. Our portion has gone toward technical assistance, so increasing our extension presence. So it's not just an army of me. And that's included pulling in someone more on the processing side, which is Shepard Stearns, and another support person on the extension side, which is Ansley Roper, and our fantastic financial person, who is Dana Weber, that answers all their nuts and bolts questions about how do I get my contract and how do I get reimbursed. They really like him. He's very useful. And then also our lab staff with the Precision Dairy Quality Lab. So to utilize our services, email, phone call, reach out to us in any way, shape, or form. We help evaluate grants for these producers. We also partner with entities in other states. We partner very closely with North Carolina State University, and then University of Kentucky and the Kentucky Dairy Development Council. So all of them provide support across our region, which is West Virginia down to Florida and over to Louisiana. So we cover 12 states and Puerto Rico.
Oh, wow.
Through that program.
That's a big group.
There's a lot of support required for that.
Yeah.
And then we do touch base meetings, like catch up reports every 6 months, every 12 months, how these grant funds worked for you. What else would you like to see coming down the pipeline? We do a lot of webinars. We have our Southeast Value Added Dairy Conference that's coming up the end of July. So July 29th through 31st, we'll be here in the A&R building, doing workshops and hands-on things around like gelato making, how to make farmstead cheeses. We'll have several speakers talking about trends from consumers, what's coming down the pipeline, and kind of lessons learned from the dairy industry. We have a few people coming in to talk about like direct-to-consumer marketing. So if we make something today, how do we do like door-to-door delivery? How do we bundle some of these things together? And that's open to anyone engaged in dairy production and processing across our Southeast region. And that includes our sheep and goat guys. So we have a pretty good small ruminant group that comes as well.
That's awesome. And there's probably so much we could cover that the center is doing, but I do want to touch just quickly on that sustainability part, right? That's a big, buzzword. It's been a buzzword in the industry for a while now. There's probably a new one that we don't know about yet, but how do you talk about that, view that from the dairy lens, and what kind of technologies do you think will help folks be more sustainable in the future?
So sustainability in my brain works more for like, how do we have permanence and persistency, right?
Yep.
So it's not necessarily how do we reduce our greenhouse gas footprint, right? Like that it can be a part of
it,
sustainability,
right? But it is
right?
sustaining.
But is how do we sustain this industry and ideally grow it? Because we've been losing producers for a long time. I get calls pretty consistently about being interested in coming back. So how do we basically like recreate and reinvest in all of these resources that we probably had 15, 20 years ago, that as we have reduced our number of farms, those additional services are not able to be financially sustained, right? There's a reason we only have 2 equipment providers in the state. There's a reason we really only have 1 to 2 big nutrition companies that cover the state or can provide commodities. And it's because our numbers have dwindled. So how do we kind of help bridge that gap? Is it research around technology? Is it research around novel forages? Is it research around willingness to pay from consumers? So all of those pieces are things that we do evaluate through like the research arm of our center and then turn into translationable knowledge. But that's really the sustainability word for me, is how do we sustain an industry and keep it here?
Yeah. That's great.
Keep all of us going on.
Yes.
They go in the end of the day, right?
Yeah.
So Liz, it's been a pleasure to have you here. I'm sorry, but we need to keep it on the clock here. I think we learned a lot today about the Tennessee dairy industry and the work of the Center for Dairy and Advancement Sustainability.
Perfect.
Now I know how to say that. And well, thank you again for taking time to be here and talk with us and our producers in Tennessee.
Yeah, it was absolutely my pleasure. Hope to see as many of y'all as want to at our CVAD conference at the end of the month.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we have that coming in, right?
Yep.
Awesome. Thank you so much, and thank you all for being with us in this episode of the Livestock Podcast. We had Dr. Liz Eckelkamp today, our UT dairy specialist, talking a little bit about what we do here in Tennessee in our dairy industry as well. Thank you guys so much, and hope to see you all in the next episode.